Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Kastros, and I'm a retired battalion chief. I've been in the fire service for about 35 years, and I've been asked to speak to you about the events of 9/11. And I was part of an urban search and rescue team that went to 9/11 on the 11th from California, part of Sacramento Urban Search and Rescue Task Force 7 as part of Sacramento Metro Fire. We spent 11 days there. We lost fellow firefighters that day, and that day has been etched in our hearts and minds forever. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the events of 9/11 with the goal of really remembering what happened, remembering those who sacrificed everything and what our country did in the aftermath of that. So to give you an idea of what an urban search and rescue team is, an urban search and rescue team is a FEMA team comprised of firefighters, doctors, structural engineers, hazardous material specialists, and rescuers. And our job is to be able to go anywhere and be self-sufficient for 72 hours, and then potentially be there as long as necessary, working 24 hours a day until the mission is completed or until our service is no longer required or we get relieved. The urban search and rescue teams are supported by FEMA, but they're comprised of local agencies like fire departments. There's 28 such teams in the United States. My team is one of 8 in California. The rest are spread throughout the United States in cities like New York and just throughout the entire United States. So we work together as a team of teams, and 9/11 was an unprecedented event in which all of us went and spent time there. All 28 teams eventually went. And being all risk means that we need to be ready for anything. So we also respond to hurricanes, landslides, earthquakes, and obviously human-made and natural disasters. At the time of this, it was unprecedented, especially the fact that we were also looking for our own. 2,977 people died that day. Of those, 343 were firefighters from the FDNY. Many of those were personal friends. And so it's an honor for me to represent them and their memories today. And I thank you for your time. This is what it looked like before 9/11 downtown, the World Trade Center. You can see the two towers looking down here. And afterwards, they were obliterated. They came down and devastated the buildings around them in an unprecedented manner. We had never trained for something of this scope, of this magnitude, especially under these conditions. We're designed to go with over 70 personnel and approximately 80,000 pounds of equipment to be self-sufficient for up to 72 hours and then supported from there on out. We take everything to support our team, including food, water, restrooms, medications, and everything needed for the mission and to support the team. That includes power, fuel, generators, and all the tools needed. As I mentioned, we have hazardous material specialists, dog handlers, search specialists, and physicians to help support the team. As we approached, it was clear that this was an incident beyond the scale of anything any of us had ever imagined or prepared for. As we made our way downtown, it was obvious that multiple buildings were either demolished or severely damaged and had potential for falling while we were performing our rescue operations. As you can see here, many of the automobiles in the area were crushed. They were flipped over. They were thrown on top of each other. You can see that we arrived there within just about 36 hours after the towers went down, or less, approximately 24 hours. And you can see that many of the cars still had headlights on. Windshield wipers were still moving. Fires were still burning. And it really looked like a movie set. It didn't seem real. What really impacted us the most was the condition of the fire engines, fire trucks, and fire apparatus from the FDNY Fire Department of New York. Seeing these rigs that were crushed and smashed like tin cans really created a sense of sorrow in our hearts, because we knew that these were our brothers who had come to another call to help other people, not knowing what was in store as they ascended those buildings. As the fires continued to burn and the first tower fell, it became obvious that this was going to be an unprecedented disaster on American soil and for firefighters. When the first tower fell, rest assured that the firefighters from the second tower continued their ascent to save as many civilians as possible. There's an untold number of civilians that were saved by the FDNY that day. They went up there, they didn't give up. And something was said by a teammate of mine, which sticks to me to this day. Those firefighters from FDNY didn't lose their lives. They willingly gave their lives in service to their country and to their fellow citizens. And to see these coffins, if you will, of fire apparatus as we approached the scene, it was a grim reminder that we had no clue how many firefighters were entombed in the pile. So our rescue mission was that of civilians and fellow firefighters. Again, an unprecedented event. FDNY is a large organization, the largest fire department in America. And thousands of firefighters came from all over, not only the FDNY, but from surrounding communities, as did other workers and just civilians. And so the pile, as it became known, was flooded with people, all with good intentions. But this created another set of problems, because some of those people could become injured, or if we had, heaven forbid, another catastrophic collapse, we could have hundreds, if not more, injured in that collapse. The magnitude of the devastation was overwhelming. As you can see here, the rescuers looked like ants on an anthill, and it was difficult to know where to start. Not only were the two twin towers fallen to the ground, but many buildings surrounding them as part of the World Trade Center plaza were also either damaged or completely demolished. A lot of it was steel, large, huge structural steel. Imagine dropping a brick on your foot from 2 feet. This was steel girders the size of aircraft falling over 100 stories. It literally pulverized everything in its path. As the buildings came down, it wasn't just concrete, it was steel, massive steel members. And you would expect to find potentially desks, file cabinets, telephones, carpeting, any remnant of two massive 100+ story office buildings. There was very few remnants like that. Everything was virtually pulverized as it came down. This was our first assignment. This was World Trade Center number 7 that had fallen. And we were tasked with searching whatever void spaces we could to find potential survivors. As time went on, it became obvious that anyone who had survived would have been found probably in the first 24 hours by the FDNY. And that as we got into the second, third, and fourth day, that this became a recovery mission because of the sheer devastation. As you can see here, the collapse went subterranean into the subway and mall underneath World Trade Center's complex. And adjacent buildings were impacted severely. Fires were still burning and continue to burn. And there was basically a very thick layer of concrete dust all throughout the multi-square block area. Heavy moving equipment was brought in. Heavy equipment operators were brought in. And many New Yorkers came to help who were part of the local unions and steel workers so that we could move equipment, use cranes, and cut massive steel members. So you can see here, one of the adjacent buildings from the complex had pieces of the World Trade Center towers in the building, embedded in the building. And we had to search every one of these buildings, every one of these rooms, as well as the piles themselves, just to ensure that nobody was trapped or there was no one who had perished that wasn't found. We had to account for everybody. So you can see here, there were remnants of the Twin Towers. The steel external skin of the towers at the base were still standing. Here we have a child care center that was abandoned. Obviously, they evacuated. Thank God we didn't find anybody there. And you can see this American flag that was standing. The sense of patriotism, somewhat like Pearl Harbor, started to gain momentum as the days ensued. Steel members like this one that you can see here up on the right, hanging over us, were constant reminders that this was a very unsafe and unstable environment. We had structural engineers watching the buildings to ensure they wouldn't collapse on us as we searched them, and thousands of rescuers. Here we have one of our heavy rigging specialists working with the local heavy riggers and steel workers to start to pick off these huge pieces of steel to try and find voids to search. This is one of our communication specialists setting up a repeater above. You can see smoke continue to billow out throughout the area. And we would find pockets, and we worked a 24-hour operation for 11 days, a day operation and a night operation. And as I mentioned, many of the FDNY that died were friends of ours. This is a dear friend of ours who survived. And obviously, you can see by the look in his eyes, he is devastated and overwhelmed by those he lost. And all we could do was comfort him the best we could. So moments like that came and went. We would find remnants of survivors or of victims. We would do our best to salvage what we could and take the remains to the coroner, where they were doing their best to start to document any survivors or lack of survivors. This is this example of how we would mark the area as we searched a particular building or area. We worked hand in hand with the FDNY in an unprecedented fashion. The FDNY had never really called for help before because they're a massive organization. And the primary members that died were the ones that we were our counterparts because they worked the rescue companies. So many of our counterpart USAR members had perished or were missing. You can see this flag kind of hanging haphazardly. Again, another example of the patriotism that started to come. We were somewhat encapsulated in a bubble, if you will. We didn't know what was going on around the rest of the world. We didn't know how the world was responding or America was responding to this event. We were in it. The only thing that we would see occasionally was fighter jets flying overhead to patrol the area. That was a reminder of things were different now. So as we moved into the last few days of our deployment, it was a recovery mission, no longer a rescue mission. And that was a very solemn reality. Many of us, despite the wearing of air respirators like you see here, to this day have suffered lung problems, including cancer. Many responders got cancer from traipsing through the concrete dust and remains and the other hazardous materials of the area. Again, night and day operations. We use dogs to search for life. And these dogs are remarkable. They can help us clear a large building, even a pile of a large building like Building 7, in a matter of minutes, because they're trained to find life. So we can clear a building in a matter of minutes. And the responsibility of the dog handlers, as you see here, was immense, because his trust in his dog and our trust in him is what allowed us to clear an entire building, 7-story building that was reduced to rubble, and move on to take those precious resources elsewhere. That's a tremendous responsibility for this dog and her handler. Obviously, the FBI came on board. FEMA, we were part of FEMA. Law enforcement, fire, EMS, everybody was there. This is the director of FEMA at the time coming by and thanking us for our work. And again, the sense of patriotism, excuse me, is what really ensued in our final days of our deployment. Again, we were there until September 22nd. Tremendous patriotism. And I just recently watched a special on Pearl Harbor, and that was really the only other attack on American soil that's comparable to this. And the sense of patriotism from Pearl Harbor, like 9/11, started early. And that's what I wanted to talk about as we conclude our time together. Many of us had different effects upon us in this catastrophic event. We all lost friends. My friend here is looking down in the pile. He lost his god brother, and really close friends because he grew up in New York, even though he came from Sacramento, California. You can see the amount of devastation, the buildings surrounding, the windows and so forth that needed to be searched. We had to tend to our dogs as well as our own members to make sure that everybody's okay. And we were finding ourselves helping our fellow responders, our brothers from the FDNY and sisters from the FDNY. We're helping them cope and come to grips with the devastation. Our job is to come in and support the local agency, not take over. And so you can see here our task force leader and one of the deputy chiefs from FDNY are working hand in hand together. Again, the heavy riggers came in with cranes to remove some of these massive steel girders. And then it was time for us to go home. Exhaustion started to set in because even though we were doing 24-hour operations and our team was split into two 12-hour shift teams with a day shift and a night shift, it became very obvious that nobody really was down at all. We were getting at best 2 to 3 hours of sleep in 24 hours. And if that, it was noisy and was interrupted. And the 20 plus hours that you were awake was constant work and stress and emotionally a roller coaster. We would hear of brothers who died, and then the next moment you'd see one who lived, and it would be like seeing a ghost. This is a perfect example of how exhausted our folks are. He's got a can of Red Bull, but he's still exhausted. President Bush came. Mayor Rudy Giuliani came. Several celebrities and dignitaries came just to offer their support. And then we mobilized back home, back to Sacramento. And it was tremendous, the support, the love and support that we got when we got back home from our entire community and from the country. We started to break through that bubble we were in and get to the outside world. And the patriotism back in California was immense. And I want you to remember a few things from this short discussion today. Remember those who have died for our freedom, whether that day who died innocently, or those who died in Pearl Harbor, or those who've died in Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam or Korea or World War II or World War I or anywhere around the world for our freedom. Never forget that. Take care of each other. We're all Americans. Take care of each other. Let somebody else go ahead of you in traffic. I'm sure you all remember back then, 21 years ago, how there was a sense of patriotism in our country. Everybody was nice to each other. Everybody was polite. People let each other in traffic. People let each other go ahead in line at the grocery store. People looked at each other and said hi. American flags were flying everywhere. And that taught me that Americans are best when we are united. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it's united under a common enemy. So let's never forget that. And keep the faith. Keep the faith. I'd often talk about America and the American flag and the red, white, and blue of our flag. The red represents the blood of those who've been sacrificed, hurt, or killed for our freedoms. The white represents the purity of the American dream, of why America was founded. And the blue represents the future, the horizon, looking out onto the ocean, if you will, on what our future has, and it must be bright. We have to believe that. So please never forget, if you're in service of any kind, thank you for your service. For everyone listening, God bless you, your precious families, and God bless America. Thank you.